From the turn of the colonial era to the pre-revolution and antebellum eras, there was a sharp rise in the total population of Boston. A mixed population, Boston consisted of indentured servants, enslaved blacks, free blacks, white non-slave owners, black slave owners, white slave owners, and Native Americans. Even though the total population of Boston continued to rise, the population of Native Americans, particularly the men, steadily declined. With the changed gender roles that were imposed upon them by the colonists, more men started to work in more volatile fields, which led to more deaths among this certain group. Unfortunately for the Native Americans, this decrease in population coincided with the rise of the colonist population. The colonists needed more land to operate, forcing detribalization and vagrancy among Native American women. Clearly, the population of the colony as a whole was continuing to rise drastically, but this growth was very different for both blacks and whites. Even as the need for slaves continued, the black population still grew in a considerably slower manner than did the whites, which seemed to catapult in these years. And as more blacks were imported into the colonies, it became very clear that blacks had considerably higher death rates than did whites. Part of this could be because the blacks were being worked extremely hard and were exposed to unsubstantial lifestyles, while the majority of the whites were able to enjoy much more sustainable and healthy lifestyles. The data that compares the median and mean death rates of both the black and white populations is staggering. The median and mean black death rates were almost 13% higher than the death rate of the white population, which is a direct result of this forced slavery and terrible living conditions that many blacks endured in the colonies. Even free blacks were placed under tremendous political, economical, and social restrictions. As a whole, free blacks weren't given full citizenship and were prohibited from voting. Even as freemen, many blacks still did the exact same jobs that slaves would do, which helped to keep them in the lower classes of society. The inferior social status that the free blacks lived under was a combination of many different factors. Black kids were unable to attend white schools, and many had to live in the most undesirable living quarters in the towns. Even so, many blacks were able to overcome these incredibly difficult obstacles in order to forge successful lives for themselves. For example, Paul Cuffey was a self-described merchant, philanthropist, and colonizer who was able to build a school in Westport, Massachusetts. In addition, he was able to help advance the Quaker community and later founded the Friendly Society of Sierra Leone. With many other free blacks making significant contributions to society, the African American community as a whole was able to gain a little more independence. One event, titled Black Election Day, was used by slaves and other free blacks to show that they were worthy of autonomy and freedom, even if it was only for one day a year. Essentially, the African American population of Boston used this day to express pride in their African heritage and rehearse for their role as free civic participants. But as African Americans tried to keep advancing in society, whites still held a primarily negative view of both free blacks and slaves, which has led to centuries of institutionalized racism that we still see today. The quote here describes how we talk about these issues of race in America. We are always going in this loop because we are never really able to accomplish anything that can help eliminate these racial issues. All of this is the cause of how the colonists treated the slaves in the 17 and 1800s. Even with all the negative social implications of slavery, there was still a host of reasons that it was still widely used in the colonies, especially economically. Perceived by the colonists as a respectable business, the slave trade brought great wealth to the merchants and investors in the New England economy. Also, the purchasing of slaves was seen as a huge investment that yielded a lot of profit. The colonists believed that blacks possessed weaker character traits than themselves, which helped the whites justify how they treated the slaves. The colonists believed that they were helping the slaves out by assimilating them to American culture and teaching them about Christianity, which would later help them achieve eternal salvation. The biggest proponents of the slave trade were the wealthy colonists, who held the firmest grip on the pre-revolution era economy and created a clear class divide between themselves and the middle class. The quote here demonstrates this idea, the idea that in this time period, many people suffered just so a couple people could hold all of the wealth. Furthermore, Ten Hills Farm exemplifies once again how the ruling class tended to dominate the pre-revolution era economy. Manigault carefully chooses the word staggering in the quote in order to describe how great Isaac Royale's economic stature in Antigua really was. Royale's economic power was almost like an engine, in that it kept churning out more and more money through the slave trade, even as it wasn't very ethical. Clearly, this wealth that royale achieved was only for the favored few in that it was passed on from generation to generation throughout his family. Another key tool to economic success during this era was land, which was considered to be the captain of the pre-revolution era economy. The quote here echoes this sentiment, yet soon there suddenly became less and less privately owned land that was available for purchase, which aided the growth of wealth inequalities in the colonies. On top of this, many workers received very low wages for their work and couldn't afford the cost of living. Therefore, many families were unable to purchase a piece of property, which was a vital part of the pre-revolutionary economy. The ruling class in this era even showed off their power in different forms, like participating in the Boston caucus system. Powerful men such as William Cooper and John Adams were just a few men that were involved in this political organization. It was best described as a group that would employ their whole strength to obtain a choice of representatives and at ensuing election as well as best serve their grand purpose. Another key part of the antebellum era government structure was John Phillips, who became Boston's first mayor in 1822. The formation of a mayoral position represented a drastic change in Boston's political landscape from the colonial era when a whole host of people were responsible for governing Boston. Phillips soon was succeeded by Josiah Quincy and many other prominent political leaders that have taken control of politics in Boston.